Okay, this is the example with the put, the replicating portfolio from the put. It's from, I believe, 18.9, I think is the problem in the text that it's following along. So I've got a spreadsheet here. I've got this set up. I have a template for you posted out there in the Zoom materials, so I encourage you to walk through this. I believe you have an exam problem very similar to this, so this is a good one to go through and practice with the answers before you attempt the exam problem. So we'll walk you through this. It's a little bit tedious, but once you get the hang of it, or once you kind of see how it's going, it all makes sense, right? So we're starting with a put here. The tree is generated for you, so it's providing the information for you here, which is good. It's done these calculations here. This is the value. Here's the share price. Here's the value of the put, and at each step, that's what you have: the share price and the value of the put. It's given you the risk-free rate and the step size, so we're going to a quarter year per step. The risk-free rate's 5%. It expires out here at the end, right? I have added some color coding here. As I go through this problem, I'm going to do each step, and I've color-coded each step just to keep me from fun when I do these problems. It's easy to get in the wrong column, so I've just colored these to make that easier to follow. I'll point out here that there are certain prices here that are yellowed, and that's because this is the path, the possible path that the problem wants you to follow. So from here it can go up or down. It wants you to consider what happens if you go up. And then here, again, it can go up or down. It wants you to consider what happens if you go down to 50. Right? So we're going to go here, here, here. And then at expiration, you have to check that that both cases at expiration will provide the appropriate payoff. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We can go through that. Okay, now the first thing we're going to do is set up the replicating portfolio. And I talked about in the slides, I've got another recording with the slides from this unit where we talk about how the replicating portfolio is set up. The replicating portfolio for a put is your short delta shares, and you have an investment in the risk-free rate. Okay, there's a B there, meaning it's a bond that pays off in the future. All right, the B is the amount of payoff from the bond, but you can think of it as an investment in the risk-free rate. Right, and you set up the replicating portfolio so that this payoff will be the same as the payoff to the put. So short a certain number of shares plus an investment in the risk-free rate is just like owning a put if you set it all up correctly. And that's what we're going to do. I talked about in the slides how you can set this up as an equation with two equations and two unknowns to make these payoffs the same. And you can solve for delta and the risk-free investment that way. And that's great if you like to do algebra. I encourage you to do that. It does provide some insight into what's going on here. But in this problem, since we have the tree, the delta is solved for us. Delta follows our formula here, where it is the value of the option in the upstate minus the value in the downstate divided by the price in the upstate minus the price in the downstate. Remember that formula if you look at it. And so that delta is calculated for us, and we're going to use that. Right? You could solve the two equations and two unknowns if you really want to prove to yourself how all this math fits together. But I talk about that in the slide presentation. But given that we have this delta calculated here, we're going to use that. Right? So the way we do this is you initially set up this replicating portfolio at step 0. So at the beginning, you set up the portfolio, you short a number of shares, and you make an investment in the risk-free rate. And then through time, as that price goes up or down, it dictates to you how you have to adjust your position. And if you set this up correctly at the beginning and follow the proper procedure through the next several steps, you will end up with a payoff that is exactly what the payoff to the put will be at expiration. That's what we're going to show. All right. Okay, so we start at the beginning with step 0. We're at this node here at $50. The put, the problem tells us the put is worth this much, 4.289225 at this point in time. So we're going to set up the replicating portfolio. Remember, I told you delta is given to us. It's given as 0.3905. Right, and that means you are short that many shares. You start by shorting that many shares. Right? That's a fractional number of shares, which could bug you if you think, well, how do you short that many shares? But, we carry the decimals here. If you were really trying to do this for real, you would scale this up by 1,000, I guess, or, some multiple there, 100, I guess, and you'd short 39 shares, right? So you can scale this up to eliminate the fraction if you really wanted to do this in reality. But just for the math, we're going to leave the fraction there. All right, so there's my delta. Now, I know that this formula has to hold, that the payoff in the next step has to be equal to the payoff to the put option. And so if I look at the next step, I know I've got the value of the put option at the next step is 1.42919. So I know I'm short delta shares, and at the next step, the shares would be worth $58.09. So if I were short that many shares, it would cost me that much money to repay it. Plus, I'm going to have some risk-free amount that I invested in that pays off, and that has to give me the value of the put option at that point, right? So that allows me to solve for B here, right? Delta, I can calculate using my formulas, and then here I can calculate B, saying, well, I know in the next step, I've got to have that, this payoff has to hold, right? So I know that this is true. I'm just going to solve this for B. I'm going to take the payoff to the put at the next step and subtract off the number of shares that I'm short. So minus that times the value of at the next step is that, and that tells me that the payoff to the bond would have to be 24.1122. Right? So that's just solving this equation for B. Okay. Now, a good check at this point is that once you set this replicating portfolio up, it should be the cost to replicate, the cost to buy that portfolio should be the same as the cost of the put. Right? So what would it cost us to make a risk-free investment that pays off that much in the future? Well, I'm going to take its present value today. So it's going to be that times the interest rate times e to the RT. All right, that is the amount that I invest in the risk-free rate at the beginning, and I'm going to be short that many shares. Now, to make this portfolio should be the same as the cost of the put. So if I'm short this many shares, that means, and I'm going to put a minus sign here just to show the way the cash is going here. All right, I would short that many shares, and at the beginning they are worth $50 per share. So I would generate that amount of cash for me. So that times 50, that's how much cash I would get, right? And then I've got to go out and put this much money in the risk-free investment. Notice that's more than what I get from shorting the shares. So the extra amount, all right, that I get would have to be the proceeds from the short minus the amount that I need to invest today. And notice that turns out to be 4.29. That's the additional amount of money I'd have to come up with today to have this short position and that amount invested in the risk-free rate. And if you do everything right, that has to be exactly equal to the value of the put today. All right, so that's a good way to check to make sure you got this thing set up correctly at the beginning. Right? That has to be the cost. The cost to make this portfolio today has to be the cost of the put. Okay, and that's correct, so I've got that right. So I'm going to leave that there. All right. Okay, so once I get this set up correctly, then I just follow the path and I do what delta tells me to do, is the way I think about it. All right, so I've got it set up. I've got my replicating portfolio. I'm short some number of shares. I've got some money invested at the risk-free rate, and then I'm going to go up to here. So I'm going to go up to a price of 58, and there's the value of the put there. So when the price goes up, I have a new delta, and that's given to me here. Right, so there's my delta. Notice it is less negative. That means I'm short less, and that makes sense because the put went up. right? Meaning the probability that that thing is going to be exercised at expiration is less. So the delta gets smaller. Right? In this case, it gets less negative. Right? So when you're short shares and it becomes less negative, that means I'm short less shares. Right? Now, the way to get less short is to buy back. Okay, some of you are short shares, is to repurchase shares and close out your short position. So I initially short minus 0.39 shares. I want to, at this step, I want to only be short minus 0.16. So the difference there is just the difference between them. And that's telling me I need to repurchase 0.2236 shares. Right, so that I'll only be short that much. Now there's a cost to do that. Cost to do that, I need to buy that many shares, and at this point, they each cost 58.09. So I got to spend that much money to rebuy the shares. All right, I have to spend that much money to repurchase the shares, and I'm going to get that from my risk-free investment. The idea here is that I set this up at time 0, and then I never have to add any more money to it. Right, the only money I add to it is the initial 4.28922 that I add to begin, and then I leave it. Right? So any repurchasing comes from my invested funds. So what I'm going to have here is, well, I had that much invested. It's going to earn interest over the time period. So it's going to earn e to the RT. And by the way, that'll just turn out to be that number there. I've done everything correctly, and it is, okay? Right, but, so my risk-free investment paid off that much, but I have to spend that much of it. I'm going to do the math here again just to make the point. I have to go out and repurchase that many shares, 2236 shares times that cost per share. Right, so at the end of this step, my position will be I'm short that many shares, and I have that much invested at the risk-free rate. Right? Notice my short position is much less, and my investment's much less because I went out and spent money to repurchase shares. Right? So that's where I am at the end of step time 0.25. Right? And then I'm going to go the next one. So I go from here to here, goes down to 50. Now the price went down, so since this is a put, delta is going to go up. Right? The new delta is going to be here. And it's more negative, meaning I'm going to short additional shares. So I'm going to short more shares, get my short position up. Right? Well, when I short shares, that's going to generate funds. Where are those funds going to go? Well, I'm going to add them to my risk-free investment. Right? Now, the number of shares that I need to short additionally is just the difference there. So I need to short an additional minus 0.2292. Right? Now, that is going to generate additional funds here, and I'm just going to make this number positive to show the funds that it's generated. I'm going to short that many shares at that price, and I'm going to generate that much additional funds, 11.46, and I'm going to add those to my risk-free investment. So I'm going to have this investment now. Remember, it earned interest over that time period. It's easy to forget this step and you'll end up with the wrong number. It earned interest, and I'm going to have an additional that much from the additional shares that I short. So at the end of this period, I will end up with 22.7273. Okay, so at the end of step 5 now, I'm short that many shares, and I have that much invested at the risk-free rate. Okay, and then from here, the next step is expiration, and you have to check it both the up and the down to make sure your payoffs are what they should be. So we're going to do that. If we go up, then the price goes up to 58.09. And so to repay the short, we have to go out and purchase that many shares, and each share costs us that much. Right? Something wrong there. Operator here. So I have to repurchase that many shares times that price per share. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to collect from my investment. It earned the risk-free rate, 5% times 0.25 years. And if I've done everything correctly, those should net out to exactly 0. Right, so that's fine in the upstate. Now in the downstate, notice I should net out to 5.9646. So let's just do that. I'd have to repurchase that many shares. The price went to 43.03. And I'm going to collect that much from the risk-free investment. And if I net those out, I'll end up with 5.9646. Right, so everything turned out just the way it should have. That's good. So I set everything up right. I can be confident about that. So that's how the replicating portfolio works. It's just a bit tedious here, but for me, I found it's easier to go through one where I have the answers and I know the numbers. So I encourage you to walk through this example. Be sure you get it right, you understand what you're doing, and then you can try the one. I'm pretty sure, I can't remember if the one on the exam is a call or a put, but I'm pretty sure you have one like this on the exam. If it's a call, I went through one of those in the slides, in the lecture slides, so that example's in there. Here's the example for the put. So I'm just going to leave that here.